welcome to the Awake Space Astrology Podcast. I'm Lori Rivers with you, here to help you with some inspiration to get those aspirations out into the world. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, do we have a week ahead. It's a doozy, guys. Not only do we have the eclipse at 29 degrees of Aries, and I'll go through that with you, so hold on. We're also looking at Mercury retrograde this week, and it's fascinating, the astrology of it. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch as we end up this week when we look at world events and the weather and seismic activity and all sorts of stuff. On an individual level, what do I always say? It can be great for you. It can be great for you. It's really human nature to look for the, what's going to go wrong? I know I caught myself doing it tonight because I was trying to choose the start date for the new Natal Chart Foundations class, and I'll talk about that more in this episode too. And there I was looking at the astrology charts, trying to see what's going to go on. And, I was looking at my lunar returns and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, why am I expecting something to go wrong? Just freaking pick a day, So May 20th was the day I picked. Celebrating patrons in this episode because we reached 800. We are now at the 800 mark. My golly, that's a big deal. Thank you. And so we'll talk about that in patron shout outs. If you haven't listened to the interview with Asanabe, go and listen to the second part of that in episode 17. No guests today. It's just going to be raw astrology because it is a week. And I don't want you to be freaked out, but it's serious. There's serious stuff on the world horizon. And we're looking at the economics, we're looking at the geopolitical stuff, and we're looking at our internal self. So I will talk about what I think the eclipse is going to do for you and what I think you can do to survive Mercury retrograde closer to the end of the podcast. Okay. I'm going to talk about the geopolitical stuff and the seismic stuff and all the other stuff I think is going to happen in the world at the top of the episode. Okay. And then we'll do our patron shout outs, and we'll also have our ending of the podcast, which is our Q&A. And so if you're a patron, remember, you can submit your questions to the podcast for me to answer. I usually pick 2, maybe 3 per episode. And that's how I like to round out the podcast. Alrighty, I think I've blathered long enough. Let's talk about what I think it's going to be like this week, because it's when we have astrology like this, it's not just a singular event. And well, we'll just talk about that coming up next. Well, Mercury is at its pre-retrograde phase because this is take 3 of this segment of the Awake Space Astrology Podcast. Technical snafu. Could be because I keep hitting the wrong button on my computer too, but it's so much more fun to blame Mercury, isn't it? Isn't it nice to have a scapegoat? And we get that a couple times a year. So, yeah, Mercury goes retrograde at the end of the week, right after the eclipse. That's super fun. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about what I think is going to happen in the mundane astrology. Now, before you freak out, please understand towards the end of the episode, I'm going to walk you through what to expect with the eclipse and what you can expect with Mercury retrograde through your natal chart. Okay. Natal astrology and understanding our individual timing is a different skill set than looking at the mundane. The mundane doesn't have any freaking free will. You do. So we'll talk about that towards the end of the podcast. So On the 19th, my time on the Pacific Coast, about 9:36 p.m., we have the Aries new moon / solar eclipse. It's not visible in the United States. Okay, so it'd be the very early hours of the morning on the East Coast of the United States, then keep moving backwards. The rest of the world knows time zones. In America, we don't tend to. But in Australia, it is visible. New Zealand, it's visible. Southeast Asia, it is visible. We're talking Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Papua New Guinea, Micronesia, parts of Polynesia. I'm not certain that Hawaii will have it visible there. It might be to a small degree. It's hard for me to see on the map. They don't have it pointed out, and my vision isn't great. So you'll have to check that. You guys can let me know. But I don't think Hawaii has it in visibility. Even southern Japan, we'll see a little bit of it. So like the southern islands. So we know there are tensions in the Southeast Asia. We know that because China was doing a lot of very aggressive war games around Taiwan. They're doing a lot of militaristic posturing. Okay. And I don't know if you know the history between China and Taiwan. It's worth going and doing a Google search and read up on the history. It has been contested since, World War II, or just before World War II. So it's an ongoing conflict. And we just sent a warship through the Straits of Taiwan about a day after. I just saw this tonight. About a day after the Chinese ended their war games, which were definitely posturing as a threat to Taiwan. So what do? We sent our warship through. I'm like, oh, great. Because we only have an eclipse happening. Can we please have astrologers on staff? Can we? Now, I don't think we're going to see the beginning of World War III. I don't. I think we're doing a lot of posturing. And honestly, for both our populations, this is a nice distraction tactic from an global economy that is unraveling. With the eclipse happening at 29 degrees of Aries, it is very, very volatile energy. And then the moon swings into Taurus shortly after, like in less than 2 hours later, into a square with Pluto. And so I think we'll see some economic issues. This could be to do with supply chain, manufacturing, food supply, and it could be seismic activity or more volcanic activity. We could see that over, between let's just say the 20th and the 23rd. And the reason for this is we have that eclipse, then the moon slides into a square with Pluto. The sun slides into a square with Pluto. And then the moon is approaching Uranus as Mercury stations direct in Taurus on the 21st/22nd. Ha 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 ha. So my concern isn't a singular astrological event. It's this series of astrological events, which lets me know, because remember, like that square to Pluto isn't really causal, it's representative, but the moon and the sun are causal. And it's more causal in like geographic events. It could also be causal on our consciousness, I mean, we already know how people behave on full and new moons. Eclipses are a little interesting for us as a species. So they've never really done all the studies, so we don't have scientific proof. But we do have a lot of years of observation. Eclipses, they are they are a time indicator of great change or great events, the fall of leaders. They could be the ousting of a leader. It could be a political issue. There could be fires. There could be seismic activity. There could be volcanic activity. All of that has great potential in these charts. And so, if you live in the region where it's visible, and I know I have listeners there, be careful. Make sure you've got your emergency preparations, and just in case, especially if you're in Indonesia, um, Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, um, New Zealand, Micronesia, Polynesia. I'm a little concerned on the geoseismic activity and what could happen there. It's a very, when I look at the eclipse chart, it is very much pointing in your direction. Okay. When I look at it, it's a western, very heavy Western hemisphere chart from my location, which actually means when I look out west, I'm looking towards your region, right? I know everybody says it's east, but if you live on the west coast, when we look west, well, you're looking across the Pacific. So, yippee skippy. So do be mindful. I think we could see commercial real estate dive. Just dive. I think, private equity firms like BlackRock and Vanguard will be dealing with some stuff. Usually an eclipse cloaks things. I don't think this one cloaks anything. I think it is the end of the beginning of an end of a cycle. And I think it isn't so much about cloaking or revealing. It's more like a precision scalpel saying, okay, now we're done with this part, here we go. And it's volatile. It's volatile. Again, I'm very concerned about potential arsons in that region. You could see, again, political disruption, political unrest, instability in economies, and especially for like Indonesia, where there was just a very large earthquake, which was when the moon was conjunct Pluto last week. They had a 7.0. They may have a bigger earthquake, or they may have like some smaller aftershocks, things between 4 and 5.0. But that would be, that moon is the start of Eid, because it's the end of Ramadan. And so, which is a huge celebration in Islam. And so, I'm a little concerned. Will we see things, happen with that? Will there be religious extremism? I mean, we've still got Mars and Saturn in a trine, which makes it highly likely for the extremists of who are nationalists and religious all at the same time. And this could be in Australia or New Zealand too, guys. This isn't. It's not just about, I'm not talking about Islam in general. Just let me know. It's all, we can see extremism in all religions. So, so there could just be some real big things that happen in that region of the world. What does that have to do with you living in the United States or Canada or Great Britain? Well, a lot more than you like to think about, because a lot of things are manufactured in Asia and Southeast Asia. Okay. Your technology, that's why they've been trying to move chips over here. A lot of your consumer packaged goods, your clothes, your furniture. One of my concerns for our economic well-being is we have so made all manufacturing offshore in this country. The difference between 2008 and now is in 2008, we could still get, supplies to make things, right? Those supplies are low now globally. Globally, supply chain is slow. It's as slow as molasses. Go into any store, there's still empty shelves. There's still empty shelves. Okay. Because the supply chain was weak before the pandemic. Okay. We had been losing variety. We had been losing options years before. It's just most people weren't paying attention. Okay. No blame. Can you say special interest? I thought you could. And that's mine. Observing the world, observing things working, seeing the correlations, looking at the astrology. So I fully expect there to be an issue between the United States and China regarding Taiwan. That situation escalating. No, not World War III. But I think we're going to see things hot up starting on the 19th/20th, moving forward 21st, 22nd, 23rd. I think we'll see seismic activity more likely in the area and region impacted where the eclipse is visible, because an eclipse needs to be visible for maximum impact, for the big malevolent information, impact to be there. If only you could see my air quotes when I say malevolent. But eclipses were considered malevolent because from the human perspective, we don't like natural disasters. It makes it hard for us. And with the moon moving into Taurus, which is the sign of stability, sustainability, sustenance, opulence, luxury, finances, real estate, and that moving into a direct square with Pluto and Aquarius, it lets me know we've got some economic impact. It lets me know we've got some issues with transportation, communication, food supply, and there could be seismic activity with this. And then with Mercury retrograde coming up in Taurus, and it having a hint of the qualities of Scorpio, because when a planet's retrograde, it takes on some of the qualities of its opposing sign. It does not replace it, but just think, Mercury in Taurus with a hint or an overtone or undertone of Scorpio. So we're looking at strategic resources. We're looking at having to repurpose things in a different way. We're going to hear about espionage or secrets being revealed. And I was postulating to my mods. I was like, wow, will we hear about like something out of Georgia when it comes to the indictments? I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm not even 60% sure. It popped into my head and I'm postulating. If I get that one right, then we know my intuition was strong. But yeah, is it something to do with Georgia? I think we could see a rail accident. When we're looking at the states, I think we could see more rail issues. I think we could see trucking issues. I think we could see more food supply issues to do with petroleum products, oil, gas, and commercial real estate globally is failing. Globally. That's why they're trying to make people go back to work to justify the cost of commercial buildings. The old system is dying. It's dying an ugly death. And what are our global leaders doing? Nothing to innovate. Oh, good times. I could get fired up about that, but it's late and I know I need to sleep because I have to do businessy stuff. Yeah. So we're looking at everything kind of shake, rattle, and rolling. Our reality will look very different at the end of April as we move towards May. Because not only is Mercury moving into its retrograde this week, at May 1st, Pluto stations retrograde and starts swinging back towards Capricorn. And as I've been telling you for quite some time, we are not in the Pluto and Aquarius era yet. We're getting that sneak peek. We are watching the end of the Pluto and Capricorn era. And we're watching the end of the industrial or post-industrial world as it unravels. It doesn't mean it's all going to fall apart. We're not going to lose everything with it. We're not necessarily going to fall into a deep, dark age. But that which no longer serves is going to very much struggle. And it's up to each one of us to find our own sustainability, our own way of finding our value besides being attached to a lord and master. Okay, so if you listen to episode 17, we talked about feudalism. We talked about feudalism, and the industrial era was an extension of feudalism. You think of how companies treat you. It's like they own you because they're paying for your time, and they don't. You have skills that they need to keep them afloat. They don't own your labor, but our laws get set up so that it ends up, being that. We need to restructure. I keep saying we need workers' cooperatives. Now is a great time to research that. Not everybody's meant to be a solo operator, solopreneur, entrepreneur. Not everybody's a risk taker. Some people want to collaborate and communicate and work with a team, which is so much more fun. At least in my experience, but I like to work with a good team. I'd rather work by myself if I can't bring, competent, good people together. If I've got competent, good people together, that's great. But we need learning pools because, human beings learn through example, we learn through training, we learn through mentorship. And so you can't just expect everybody to be like, oh yeah, I know how to run a business, because you don't. It takes time. It took me a long time because, like everybody else, I was trained to be a worker bee of some kind. Owning your own business is different. But Lori, I'm spiritual and you keep using the word business and I'm uncomfortable. Well, you better get comfortable with it. Capitalism isn't going away entirely. Even Marx didn't say to dump money. He was saying that the people working should have a stake in the company. He was advocating for workers' co-ops. He was advocating. A union is actually a poor substitute. It's just an interim measure compared to workers' cooperatives. But it requires education and training, especially in communications and structures and organizational structures, to make it work. Okay. So it would be good to make sure you go grocery shopping this week. Buy a little extra. Don't hoard. Just buy a little extra. Of what? Of whatever you like. Of whatever. If this particular item was no longer available, you would be sad. Okay. I would also look at anything to do with aluminum. So if you use aluminum foil, plastic wraps, and any of that kind of thing, household cleaners, those types of things, they'll be impacted through global resources and shortages and fun things like that. And then grow your food. I've been telling you, I've got a little space, and I now have a hydroponic garden that is so cool. My cucumber is really getting big. And I've got a second one that I'll probably set up this weekend coming. Maybe I'll do it before I teach marketing magic. Maybe I'll do it after. By the way, that class is almost full. I'll talk about that a little later. But if you don't start working on your own sustainability, and you probably think like it's overwhelming that you weren't trained for this. And no, you weren't. But, we're really capable of learning, and we've got a little bit of time to network, come together. And I think more people have side hustles than ever before. I think more people are certainly more ready to get their hands in the clay than they were 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 10 years ago, So, I'll be talking about this a lot. Not because I think everybody, again, needs to be entrepreneurs. I don't think everybody has the temperament, but I'd love people to look at making workers' co-ops. And this fall, I'm going to do some professional development. I'll do a professional development coaching program for intuitive and creative service providers, so that people can get set up in a way that is ethical, sustainable, okay, and helps them build forward with like really some hands-on information. Most times you get into a business coaching program, it's all the same thing. Make your client avatar, write down what you really want. It gets into manifestation, and I'm going to be like, you got a website, you got a way for people to pay you. I'm Cancer is a financial sign, man. It's all about making sure you got enough food to eat, you got shoes on your feet. I like to make sure my astro babies are taken care of. So we'll look at that in the fall. Okay. We'll look at that in the fall. And by the end of this week, you'll be like, oh, wow, yeah, Lori, yeah, I should probably be looking at my future, because there's a whole lot going on. And remember, it's not the activities we see in the astrology this week. It's not just for this week. That energy rings out over time. So we're beginning kind of a new phase as we move through 2023 and 2024. It's the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning of the end of this normal that we have. It's not the end of the world. It's the end of how we've organized ourselves as human beings collectively. And isn't it time things changed? We can do it the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. And that's why you hear Elon Musk whining. Oh, civilization as we know it. Oh, you mean without hierarchy and patriarchy and apartheid and genocide? Climate change is a bigger threat to us, Elon. Oh, jeez. He is not a genius. He's privileged. Don't confuse the two. You don't have to be a genius to be good at business. And most people don't become billionaires that start their own businesses. But if you can put a little bit away, if you can pay your rent, if you can pay your bills, make sure your kids get enough, having a good sense of enough, if you can help out and support other people, isn't that why we're here? Instead of playing this game of acquisition that is literally making it difficult to live on our planet. So anywho, that's my lecture. Let's go to celebrating 800 patrons. That is up next on the Awake Space Astrology Podcast. heckin' darn. We reached 800 patrons. That's really super cool. Thank you. Thank you. If you've ever tried to grow a Patreon, then you know these benchmarks matter. And sometimes I talk about being a Patreon ambassador. I don't in every episode, but it's a real pleasure to work with the folks at Patreon, to just keep making the platform better. Okay, that's kind of what we do. We get together with the Patreon team. We help with product development. We answer surveys. We talk about what would make it better, and we meet incredible creators from a huge variety of backgrounds, whether they're game developers, other intuitive people like, mediums, tarot readers, people like myself who are astrologers, podcasters of all kinds, people who work with wildlife and animal rescues, people who are musicians and writers, and you name it, creativity across the gamut. It is such a rich and vital community. So, to sponsor a creative person's work, and yes, I'm analytical, but I'm also a creative. I've always been both. The fact that 800 of you like me and what I have to say enough to sponsor all of this and to take the classes that I offer is careful, I'm going to get verklempt. It is so meaningful. I'm trying to find the words that express my gratitude and appreciation for you, because the English language is, well, it's inadequate, okay? It's just inadequate to tell you the depth of feeling I have for this level of support. So thank you to every single patron. Make sure you check your emails today, because you are getting a very special thank you. We're starting the 12-week Natal Astrology Foundations class. Now, this is a beginning astrology class that walks you from the very beginning, understanding what astrology is, what the astrology chart is, all the different parts, and by the end of the 12 weeks, you're going to be able to really take a good look at your chart and have strong foundations in your astrology. Astrologer Jennifer is going to be working with me in that class. I'll be teaching live workshops. She'll be with me in those. One of her goals is to become an astrology teacher. So she'll be my co-pilot in that class. I've got all new material coming into it as well. I'm super excited. Walkthrough videos that you'll be able to access. The live teaching, Q&As, quizzes, of course, the workbook, and so much more. And so you can check that out through the link in the show notes. Okay. But if you're a patron, you guys are getting the email today. Okay. You guys are getting the email today with your special thank you discount. I always give the deep discounts to the patrons. So big thank you to you guys. Patrons get a bunch of different perks. I give them special discounts on classes and readings, exclusive content. My really juicy political content goes into Patreon. So like my Trump predictions are the pinned post. And then we're going to have a couple of political figures. I'm going to be doing Mariana Williamson's chart exploration for patrons by the end of April. Okay. This week, my parents are in town. I haven't seen them since 2021 when my dad was in the hospital, and we're actually going to have some fun. So if you follow me on TikTok, you'll be able to see my mom and me do some live streaming or videos. We haven't decided yet, but my mom's a hoot and a half. My dad might even poke his head in. Probably will. I might interview them or something about what it's like to have a crazy astrologer kid. But anyway, let's get on to the patron shout outs, because without you, there is no me, and you are so greatly appreciated. So we've got Kaya, Kate, Megan, Stephanie, Alyssa, Margaret, Brianne, Crystal, Angela, Mountaintop Artist, Shanessa, Cecilia, Woodcocks, Kimberly, Nicole, Glitch Paladin, Todd Nabby, Tennessee Street Cat, Carla, Mark Dean, Andrea, Laura, Alexis, Brooke, Adele, Steve of Finland. I love your username. I had a really good friend from Finland. She lived in the States forever, but she immigrated here from Finland, and man, do I have good stories. She was a funny lady. Evie, Hemi Hurst, Brooke, Jess, Jana, Angela, Carrie, Kat, Elizabeth, Anonymous, Lori, Marissa, Candace, Carly, Maria, Sarah, Elena, Ginger Gypsy, Kim T, Martins times 2, and Alexis. Thank you. Thank you for being patrons. You guys are the newest patrons, so huge thank you to all of you. Alrighty. So now let's go into the next segment. We're going to be talking about what you can expect with this eclipse as it lands through your chart. If you're not sure of how to identify the parts of your chart, you can go to my YouTube channel where I have a walkthrough video that just lets you know how to make sense of some of the squiggles and lines. That's a great thing to take a look at, especially if you're thinking about taking that 12-week natal course. And of course, patrons, you got your special discount. You're getting half off that class from now through April 30th. That code is good. Wowza. I'm still just overwhelmed. The class starts May 20th. So if you've got to save up your pennies, make sure you register before May 20th. I was going to say, real quick update on the website. I was trying to get in a payment plan like Afterpay or Klarna. They only work with physical items. They don't work with services or digital products. So it's a bummer. But if you have a PayPal account, you can use the pay later function or the payment plans functions with PayPal. And that's what I've got. I'm still trying to get a hold of Wix to work on other payment solutions. But the sad part is, in the metaphysical world, there's so many fraudsters and hucksters that we become a restricted industry sometimes. And so even though I have a really great reputation with my financial institutions, I'm in an industry that often people, take a look at and wink an eye and go, oh man, so that's why I'm a stickler about ethics and stuff, because of that. But anyway, thank you so much. Let's talk about how the eclipse and everything else this week, including Mercury retrograde, is going to impact you. Well, all right. So this eclipse is at 29 degrees of Aries. You want to find where that is in your natal chart. So you want to look for 29 degrees of Aries and the house it's in. Now I use Placidus, and again, the chart walkthrough on my YouTube channel will really help clarify that. Don't overthink it, just follow the instructions, okay? Astrology is not an easy subject to learn, guys. It's not just something you watch a couple videos about or you read a couple books. Every professional astrologer will say astrology is a subject that continues to be something we dive into deeper and deeper over time. But just the foundations of astrology take a minute to learn. So don't think just because you can make a free chart that is something you'd be able to read right away. All right. It takes time. It took time for everybody who is an astrologer. All right. We just became obsessed and studied very hard. So let's talk about where this is landing. So if you have 29 degrees in your first house, you are looking at setting intentions around true self-sabotage, how you hold yourself back from putting yourself out there, for advocating for yourself. You might also look at your reactivity. Okay, so if you're very quick to self-defense, if you're always looking for the threat, you might be sabotaging yourself with that. You might think, oh, I'm advocating for you know, but being aggressive and assertive are two different things. And if you're always looking for the threat, that means you're always afraid, and that does not put you at ease. So you want to set affirmations or intentions to remove your self-sabotage, so you might feel like you're not enough or you're too much, so you could say, even though I feel like I'm too much sometimes, I'm setting the intention to know I'm just right. I'm just the right version of me in the present moment. You're reframing how you speak about and to yourself. Okay. Even though I've experienced harm, even though I've had trauma, I know in this moment I have created safety for myself. That's a good one for that first house. Bring that cortisol down. You'd be like, what does this have to do with anything, Lori? Well, it has a lot to do with it, because you're reframing how you talk about yourself. And so your perspective is going to change. Our perspective changes or shapes our reality. So if you can change your perspective, you switch how you see the world. So instead of looking at through lenses of the problem, you're choosing to see the world through the lens of solutions. So you can also choose, somebody asked on TikTok, they said, so I know I need to lose weight and get in shape. Is this a good time to let go of my fear of going to the gym and worrying about what other people think of me? And I was like, that is the perfect metaphor. So even though I'm not at my ideal weight, I know when I go to the gym, I'm opening the door to that possibility. I'm going to appreciate where I'm at right now, because I know I'll appreciate myself as the more I practice feeling better about myself. If you're not where you want to be, you still want to appreciate who you are and where you are in the body, So even though I'm not physically where I want to be, I appreciate that my physical body is still here and it's serving its perfect purpose. I'm going to take better care of it. So that's a great one. If the 29 degrees is in your second house, this is the perfect time to root out some of those scarcity mindsets people talk about. It could be, because you're the one who's bringing forth the resources to yourself. You're calling them in. So even though I've experienced hard times, even though things were rough when I was a kid, I know I have skills that can help me feel more secure. Okay, you don't even have to bring up money yet. Okay, I have skills that can make me feel more secure. Even though I'm not sure about how I'm going to make more money, I know I can learn how. Okay. My value is not dependent on how much money I make. I'm priceless. Okay, that's one of my favorite ones. Try that one on for size. Okay. I am capable of learning everything I need to know to create the systems that help me live a sustainable life. Okay. When I know what I want, it's easier to bring it into me. Okay, so letting yourself want things and not feeling guilty about it. This is a great moon for that. Notice we're setting intentions that help remove obstacles. Third house. I'm even though other people think I'm opinionated, I know my voice matters. When I choose my words carefully, they have more power. When I allow myself to stand in my truth, I'm able to be of service. Okay. All right. Be very careful driving if that on the 19th and 20th if you've got that moon in the third. Fourth house. Even though I had to do a lot of self-parenting, I know that gave me skills to develop my own path in life. Okay. Sometimes things aren't fair, but they give us skill sets. These are the skills I developed from having to really parent myself. If it's, again, fourth house. I like things the way I have them. Okay, I like things the way I have them. And when I appreciate what I have, more of what I want comes to me. All right. That can work in a couple of cases. All right, so it could be to do with your physical home. All right. Fifth house. Although physical home, be careful lighting any candles. Okay. This is a really trippy eclipse. All right. If it's not in your locality, don't worry about that. That was kind of a joke. I have gallows humor. Fifth house. When I allow myself to be expressive, when I share my enthusiasm, it doesn't matter if people like it or don't like it. I like the way I feel when I'm fully expressing myself. Here's another one. Just because I'm really good at something doesn't mean I have to do it for a job. It's okay to just create for creativity's sake. Sixth house. When I'm really aligned with what I do, it doesn't feel like work. When I'm in the right environment with the right people, I do better. My tension levels reduce when I have a schedule that really works for me. I may not like the job I have right now, and I know I'm capable of finding one that works better for me. My job is not my identity. What I do day to day is not who I am. If that 29-degree moon is falling into your 7th house, when I am in a mutual partnership, we both retain our identities. Just because I committed to something one time doesn't mean I can't renegotiate. If the terms aren't fair to everyone, they're not fair at all. And that includes if they're not fair to me. It's okay to say what I need and want in my important relationships. If it's falling into the 8th house, just because something happened in the past doesn't mean it has to rule my present. I often overgive support to others, and I'm willing to allow support into me. When I push against what people can give me because I think they can do better, I leave myself with less resources. So I know I can appreciate where people are at now and give them room to grow into their potential. That's a tricky one. I can trust my intuition because I get physical signals. Okay. 9th house. I have really strong principles and ethics. And sometimes I need to adjust them to fit new information. I have really strong ideas of what is right and wrong. And sometimes I need to gather more facts before I make a judgment. It's okay to have big dreams because I know how to research the information to set realistic benchmarks. 10th house. I have ambitions, and it's okay to be ambitious. People really respect who I am, even if I don't understand why. I accept that they respect me. When I'm being truly authentic, that's when I reach more of my goals. The 11th house. When I'm with the right people, everything comes together. When I choose to see my professional network or community through a pragmatic lens, I'm less likely to become disillusioned. When I'm with the right community and team, I get inspired. Okay. 12th house. When I am still, I know I can connect to the universe. When I'm overly judgmental or feel shame or guilt, I limit my ability to trust the process. If I dedicate a little time each day to meditate, I can soothe my nervous system. Am I ready? Okay, so that's for the eclipse. So for Mercury retrograde, let's talk about your survival guide. Who's it gonna get the most? Well, if you've got fixed signs, okay, if you've got fixed signs. So like for me right now, Mercury is opposite my ascendant. So I'm a Scorpio rising. And so I've noticed there's been some snafus to my schedule because it's in my 6th house. So my daily schedule's already getting messed up because Mercury is in its pre-retrograde phase. There's no such thing as a pre-shadow. There is no such thing as a pre-shadow. There's no such thing. There is pre-retrograde. Okay. There's pre-retrograde. And so that just means Mercury is starting to apparently slow down in the sky before it looks like it stops. That's the station. It appears to stop, and then it appears to start moving backwards in the retrograde. None of that's actually happening from an astronomical point of view, and that's one of their gotcha moments with us. They'll be like, see, it doesn't really happen. And it's like, well, yes, and astrology isn't about that. It's about our position on Earth, looking up at the sky, recognizing the timing from the perspective of being human. So, if you have fixed sign placements, and I'm talking about your personal placements, your rising, your sun, your Mercury, your Venus, your moon, your Mars, those placements are going to probably feel, whether it's Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, you guys are probably going to feel more. If you have a retrograde, if you already have Mercury retrograde in your chart, that doesn't mean that Mercury retrograde by transit is any easier. It really depends on the relationship it's making in your chart. Okay, because retrograde doesn't mean good, it doesn't mean bad, it just is. It has it's just a time for review and revision, and even the frustrations in the schedule. Like, it can be something that actually meets a need. Just because we think we want something to go a certain way doesn't mean that if it goes that certain way, it's going to be what we need it to do. So there's that. What's next? The cardinal signs might be a little energized, and that would be Aries. Let's see, we've got Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. So Taurus sextiles Cancer, and it trines Capricorn. So if you've got, from the mid degrees to the early degrees of those signs, they'll be more energized. Mercury will actually end up sextiling Mars again on the retrograde. And that's going to probably be kind of interesting on a mundane level. On an internal level, it's a chance to kind of take a look at where you're putting your energy and your actions when it comes to the area where Cancer is in your chart, because that's where Mars is hanging out through this. Remember, Mercury retrograde is for 3 weeks. It's 3 weeks. And then you've got 2 weeks of the shadow. And the shadow is the post-retrograde period where Mercury is then in direct motion moving back over the retrograde tracks. And that's where you can put everything together. That's why we're not starting the Natal Foundations class. We're not starting that till after Mercury is direct. I just don't want to deal with teaching a class before it's direct, just because. Talking about Mercury retrograde, and you end up hitting a button when you don't want to, and it's too late for me to want to be re-recording, and I have a meeting at like 10 a.m. So I'm trying to do this podcast. Once again, I want to thank everybody for being listeners, because we are in the, we go between 5 and 3% of the podcasts globally, any category. We're in the top 3 to 5% every week because of you listening. Thank you. So let's do some Q&A. I talked about the Mercury retrograde. I'll talk about it a little more next week. We'll go into it a little deeper because you'll be experiencing it, and I'll have all the "what's going on" questions. Take it easy. Take it easy. Don't try to force things with Mercury retrograde. That's my biggest thing. If it's not working, then you need to revise it. And everybody makes everything life and death and super serious. And it so rarely is. When it is, react that way. But if it's not, it's not. So let's see. What have we got here? I'm going to refresh my Google form. All right. Let's see. What are my questions? Let's see. Okay. Remember, if you are a patron, you have, let's see. Oh, I've got a great question from Alyssa. If you're a patron, you can use the Google form. It's linked up in the Crunch Report post on Patreon, or you got it in your email. Read the damn emails, guys. That's where all your perks are. You have hundreds of dollars worth of material in that email. But anyway, and you can get me to answer your questions. How do you know if a planet was retrograding in your birth chart? So, and we just say retrograde. So how do we know a planet is retrograde? Well, it tends to have an R or an R with an X. Okay, that symbolizes retrograde motion. Some softwares change the color of the planet. So often when you see the charts I usually use on TikTok, retrograde planets will show up as red. So that's a good question. Mercury is retrograde about 3 times a year in some change, depends on the year. The outer planets, so especially Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they spend about half their time retrograde. Everybody acts like it's a big deal. It's not. It's about half the time. Half of their orbit is spent in apparent retrograde. Saturn spends a good 5 months a year retrograde. Jupiter goes retrograde yearly. Venus and Mars are kind of the ringers. They don't retrograde necessarily every year. We will have Venus retrograde this year in Leo, and that happens this summer. And next year in 2024, Mars is retrograde in Leo. That should be fun. Ha 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 ha. But anyway, yeah. So retrograde is represented by an R or RX. You can see that in the chart. You have to look at, it'll be right next to the planetary symbol. So, that's a good question. And don't make fun of people. Some people be like, well, that was basic. It's not basic. It is basic. It's foundational. But if you don't know, you don't know. If you don't ask, we can't explain it. So let's see. Let's see. All right. Oh, okay. So I've changed the horoscope format. Just if you're new to astrology, just read for your rising sign. If you have a little bit of an understanding or a little more of an understanding, read the instructions for how to read for your rising sign. If you can always read for your sign and the next sign, okay? But I basically am putting out a week's worth of horoscopes, and they're broken down by time period. So you've got a date range, all right? So, let's see. Okay, Jessica says, you reminded us in the podcast, and this was probably earlier this year. You remind us in the podcast that Mercury has more of a Virgo energy when retrograde as opposed to Gemini when direct. Is there enough data on Pluto to qualify its retrograde energy in a similar way? That's a nice question. Well, they assigned Pluto to be the higher octave of Mars without astrologers having observed Pluto for a whole orbit cycle. And I think there's a lot of hubris involved in declaring all we declare about Pluto as a celestial body. I don't think we've had enough time to observe it. Just like people call it a generational planet, it's not really, not by its orbit. It just so happens we've lived through the fastest part of the orbit, right? I've talked about this in past episodes. It's starting to slow down. So, I've lived through what Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sag, Capricorn, now Aquarius. I'm in my 6th sign that Pluto's gone through, and if I live to Pluto, late Pluto in Pisces or mid Pluto in Pisces, then there's 7. But kids born today won't see that many signs Pluto's transiting through because Pluto's slowing down. It'll spend about 21 years in Aquarius once it pops in 2024. It spends 30 years in Aries, and it spends 40 years in Taurus. So there's going to be people who are born and at the beginning, maybe the end of Pluto in Pisces, beginning of Pluto in Aries, that don't see the end of Pluto in Taurus, if they have an average lifespan. So, there we go. So that's a good question. I have found through experience, and this is just my experience, okay? I can't speak for the whole astrological community, but I can speak for my experience. When Pluto, I find Pluto to be a lot more related to Saturn in some ways, but it might be because, we look at Scorpio in kind of a layered way. You might say at the basis level, Pluto can act like Mars, but it can also act like Saturn, about, authoritarianism, etc. I think we're still learning, to be honest. If we were going to be honest as astrologers, if we want to pretend we have all the answers and declare it thus and so, then you could say, yeah, so, I like to also remind people that, but you see, you have to remember that Mercury rules 2 signs. So does Venus. Pluto is the modern ruler of Scorpio. It doesn't have a dual rulership. But I think in my experience, Pluto retrograde, which happens soon, May 1st is when Pluto goes retrograde. When Pluto's retrograde, it is not as intense. The intensity tends to lessen. And so maybe it's more, like you've had immense amount of change happen, and now you're kind of going back over and kind of cleaning and tidying things up to see what works and what doesn't, before you change more. So it's not perpetual growth and transformation. You grow a little bit, you recalibrate, you toss out what, truly what was broken and needed to leave, and you shore up the stuff that has potential. And that's how I would treat Pluto retrograde. That's a really nice question. Thank you. Remember, the quality of the answer is wholly dependent on the quality of the question. But that doesn't mean there are stupid questions, because you don't know what you don't know. I'll answer one more question here. Let's see. Oh, I like that. This is from Katja. What can you look forward to with midlife transits? Is there any prep work that can help you lean into these changes those transits will likely bring? Well, the changes are kind of internal. There will be external fallout, or there'll be results of that internal change. The big ones are, you've got your your Uranus opposition, then your Saturn opposition, and then you've got your Chiron return, and those all happen between, your like 42, 43, all the way up to 51 for the Chiron return, which is not a bad thing. Everybody acts like it's bad. It's not bad. It's a chance to assess, how you've come in life. Like you can be like, wow, I wouldn't go back to being 20 for anything. It'd be nice to have the body, but the circumstances, no, I see the wisdom I've gained. I've learned a thing or three, and if you've done the healing work, because Chiron isn't, in my experience, the wound you can't heal. It's the wound it's up to you to heal. And so if you've been working on your stuff, then you're seeing some of the fruits of that labor. You can prep. I think you're already prepping. If you're living life in tune and you're kind of doing your readjustments along the way, by the time the Uranus opposition hits, then it's about really choosing yourself and living fully. And it depends on the rest of your chart. It tends just to be a different life stage in general, but if you're taking it really shallow and you're just buying the fancy car or the second, the vacation house or whatever people do, having the affairs, then you're just putting a Band-Aid on a situation. It's literally about grabbing life by the balls and just living fully. That being all of yourself, allowing yourself to be liberated after half a lifetime of life experience, and that doesn't mean relationships have to end. That doesn't mean you have to have all these big dramatic changes. But if you think about it, a lot of times people end up in quote unquote life partnerships very young, without any perspective. You might have chosen a career young without a whole lot of perspective, and then you felt like you didn't really have options due to economies. But there comes a certain point, there might be a crisis point, there might be a big aha or epiphany where you're like, if I don't take these risks now, I'm never going to take them. And so I would plan financially as much as possible. I would put maybe some money away, so that you're not really having to struggle if you decide to make some bigger decisions later. Just put it, make it a Uranus opposition fund. That would have been smarter to have. But then again, sometimes life gets in the way and you don't get to do that. For me, it was kind of just this massive overhaul of life, and it took a couple years. It's not something you have to act on in that moment, but it will continually get more uncomfortable until you do take action. So some of it is, I just, a lot of you people who are younger and you're wanting to be ready for these. And I remember that, like when I was younger, life happens, we're in a cycle one way or the other. The best way to prep is to be as honest as possible with yourself, and just do your best to understand yourself and not identify with the events that have happened to you, positive or negative, not identifying with what you do for work, understanding your identity is separate from that. And just really look at fulfilling yourself, because when you're fulfilled and happy, it spills out, it spills over. Your joy uplifts other people. It's not narcissistic to think about your own well-being, okay? Because you're not necessarily thinking of your own well-being to the exclusion of other people or making yourself paramount, to the exclusion of everybody else. But it just means you're not sacrificing your well-being, your happiness for somebody else. 9 times out of 10, if somebody says you're being selfish, it's because you're not doing what they want you to do. And then, question that. If somebody has a big ask and you're like, I really love you and I can't do that. If they're like, oh, look at you choosing yourself, blah, blah, blah. Well, they're mad because you didn't do what they wanted. That's all there is to it. If you really love somebody, like if I have a friend And I asked them something and they say, I really love you, but I just can't do that right now. I'm like, hey, I totally get it. Right? So there we go. Now, there is a big difference if everything is lopsided and you've just finally asked for something and somebody says you're selfish for asking when you've never asked for anything before, or they're gaslighting you, then that's a clue and you need to rent the clue bus, right? That is not an equal relationship. That's a different animal entirely. So I hope that made sense on the midlife. One of the things you can do is use this eclipse energy to nip out and snip and scrape away anywhere you have self-imposed limiting behaviors, All right. Once again, I want to thank all of you for listening to the Awake Space Astrology podcast. It is a bumpy ride this week. I'm not going to lie. We're going to see some really interesting headlines. But we'll get through it. That's what we do. We're adaptable. You want to be adaptable. You got to let go of where you're holding on too tightly to certain ideas and beliefs and opinions. Get ready for some interesting headlines as we move forward with this week. I'm Lori Rivers. As always, I want to thank you for listening.